The first scream rises over the city wall and hangs in the hot air. Soldiers in the siege lines look up from their shields. Horns stop mid-note. On the ramparts of Kir-hareseth, the Moabite king stands in full view, robe stiff with dust and sweat, a boy at his side. The boy's wrists are bound with a strip of dyed wool. He is the firstborn, the heir. A small altar of raw stones waits on the parapet, coals already catching, smoke pulling straight up in the morning stillness. The king says something that the men below can't hear. Then he lifts the knife. There is no parable, no courtroom, no pause for counsel. There is one act that everyone understands, and it is done on the wall where every eye can see. This is where the siege ends. But to reach that wall, you have to go back to a season of rebellion and a risky road across the desert. Moab had paid tribute to Israel for years, lambs and rams, wool and promise. When King Ahab died, his son Jehoram took the throne in Samaria. Moab chose that moment to break. Their king, Mesha, stopped sending the animals and started fortifying his cities. Israel was not strong enough alone to make a quick example, so Joram called for help. South in Jerusalem, Jehoshaphat of Judah agreed to join. The king of Edom came in as the third partner, a local ally who knew the ground. They had a choice of routes. They could push straight east across the Jordan and meet Moab head-on, fast but predictable. Or they could swing south through the wilderness of Edom and come up from the desert, where Moab was weaker and less defended. They chose the hard way. The three armies turned into the backcountry and marched for 7 days. Then the water ran out. Cattle cried. Men's tongues stuck to their teeth. The land saved its few springs for those who already knew where to find them. Dust caked around the eyes. On that 7th day, with the expedition wobbling, Jehoshaphat asked the question that leaders ask when logistics break. Is there a prophet here? Someone who can ask the Lord what we're supposed to do next? There was one, and his name already carried weight: Elisha. He was Elijah's successor, a man known for blunt answers. The generals came to his tent. He looked at the king of Israel and said he wouldn't even notice him if Jehoshaphat weren't here. Then he asked for a musician. As the harp played, Elisha spoke the command that sounded like a bad engineering order in a dry valley: dig ditches. You won't see wind. You won't see rain. But this valley will be filled with water for you and for your animals. And this is a light thing, he added. The Lord will hand Moab over to you. They dug in the night. The ground was hard, but men who want to live will cut soil until their hands bleed. At dawn, the trenches stood empty, then shivered, then flashed. Water welled from upstream, moved through the wadi like a quiet troop, and pooled in the channels until the valley shone. From the Israelite lines, the water looked clean. From Moab's watchposts, looking west into the sunrise, the surface was red. The Moabites read the color and wrote a story that made sense to them. The allies had turned on one another in the night. The valley ran with blood. That meant plunder. They came out fast and loose, without formation, without caution. They ran into an army that had slept, drunk its fill, and stacked shields for this exact moment. The ambush was simple and complete. Israel, Judah, and Edom rolled them, drove them back toward their towns, and kept going. The orders that followed sounded like old siege doctrine: cut down the good trees, stop up the springs, throw stones into the fields to ruin the furrows. It was total war in a dry land. Deny your enemy shade, water, and food. City after city fell. The coalition turned its weight on Kir-hareseth, Moab's stronghold. Stone on stone, the place was built to resist. Men in the siege lines raised rams and towers. Men on the wall bent bows and hurled rocks big as a man's torso. For a time, the fight locked into the steady language of attrition: work parties, watch rotations, meals eaten sitting on helmets, arrows clattering off rawhide shields. Mesha did not wait for the last breach. He gathered 700 swordsmen and tried a breakout toward the king of Edom, the weaker link. They hit hard and failed. The wedge of bodies smashed into rangy desert troops who knew that ground and did not break. The push stalled, then folded back into the city. Dust hung in the gaps between towers. Men bled in the alleys just beyond the gate. Then came the act that history can report but not soften. Mesha took his firstborn son, the heir he hoped to set on the throne after him, and he led him up onto the city wall. This was not in secret. It was not at night. He chose the hour when the siege lines were awake and the light was clear. He built a fire on a makeshift altar on the parapet and, in full view of the army outside, sacrificed the boy as a burnt offering. Scripture says what happened next with a single phrase. There was great wrath against Israel, and they withdrew from him and returned to their own land. What kind of wrath? That is where the record stops being a marching order and starts being a live question. Some say it was divine anger, an ancient recognition that blood spilled like that in a high place could bring down judgment on any army near it, no matter who commanded or which name they invoked. Some say it was human fury, a surge from the Moabite defenders that made the siege unbearable, a collective, terrible energy in a city that had seen the unthinkable and refused to fall quietly. Some say it was revulsion in the ranks outside. Men who had fought through 7 days without water and weeks with blood on their hands looked up, saw a father burn his own son, and felt something break. To press the siege further felt like inviting a curse. To stay was to stand under smoke none of them wanted in their lungs or on their souls. However you read it, the result was the same. Israel, Judah, and Edom lifted the siege and turned away. They had broken Moab's fields and taken Moab's towns, but they left the fortress standing after the fire on the wall. The story does not flatter anyone. It does not hand out clean victories. It starts with a rebellion and a practical coalition, moves through a near disaster solved by work in the night, glances at a tactical mistake made by an enemy at dawn, and then ends with a choice that still shocks. It is not a parable carved to yield a moral in a single sentence. It is a field report with human edges, the kind you talk about in low voices because you were there and you can still smell the smoke. Mesha's own inscription, carved on stone and found centuries later, celebrates his resistance and lists the cities he took from Israel in a time before this campaign. It fills in pride from his side of the border and frames every step as a gift from his God. The Bible leaves the bearers of water and the ditch diggers unnamed and asks you to sit with the unanswered anger at the end. In the gap between the two records, you can hear the scrape of shovels, the rattle of chariot wheels, the splash of a valley filling without rain, the breath of men who thought they were near the finish, and then the silence of a line of shields held by people who cannot make themselves take another step toward a wall crowned with a dead boy. What do leaders do when the siege turns into a reflection on the cost of their own resolve? One king ordered a march into the desert. Another king bound his son and killed him where everyone could see. The armies separated. The ground held the prints of retreating sandals and the outline of an altar where stone still feels warm in the morning sun. Afterward, people told the story with the same few facts and very different conclusions. Some heard a warning about oaths and idols. Some heard a reminder that victory withers in the smoke of certain acts. Some heard a simple sentence with a complicated weight. They withdrew and went home. You can draw your own line from ditch to wall, from water to fire. You can stand in the valley and picture the trenches shining at dawn while the enemy misread them, and then look up at a high city where a father made a choice that cleared a battlefield. You can believe that wrath fell from heaven. You can believe that wrath rose from a city and rolled across the siege lines like heat. Either way, The end is the same. The coalition lifts its hands and leaves. The fortress remains. The memory remains too, harder than stone and heavier. Thank you for listening to Divine Crime. Subscribe for more true stories from the most dangerous book ever written.